All right, welcome to the second, I guess it's the third, right? I missed the first. So the third Meteor Mentor session for our group. We got a full group today. So yeah, I don't know. Last week we just kind of talked. I guess, is that what you guys want to do now?
Yeah, works for me.
Okay.
So
Does
get
anyone,
started.
yeah, anyone got any questions?
Barry always seems to have a lot of questions.
Uh, Way to put me on the spot there, Tom.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, something I've been playing around with is, have you ever done any sort of like A/B split testing with your website? Um,
Not necessarily within Meteor itself, but so I like, have you used Hotjar?
no, I've not heard of that.
Hotjar is kind of interesting. It doesn't do A/B split testing, but it does record the visitor on your site, and you can see like it leaves a mouse trail as they go through the page. You can see where they click, and you get a little video recording afterwards. So that's kind of interesting. I do have that installed. Um, yeah,
Okay.
I guess that's about it for me as far as A/B testing goes. Has anyone else done A/B testing?
This is the one
I,
where you show different users different content, right? And then you
Yeah.
see Now I only dabble a little bit with Google. You can define some things. Played around with Google a little bit.
hmm
yeah, no, I was just playing around with React components, and I use like Mixpanel for different analytics and stuff. So was just trying to wire in, give users a random A or B variable, and then they get served that component when they use the website, and then Mixpanel will just record their different what they see.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've definitely heard of people using like Optimizely, or Google has its own setup you can use as well to kind of mod the page on site. But yeah, I think if you're going to use it with React, your setup sounds good to me.
Yeah. Well, I'll keep playing with that and let you guys know how it
Yeah,
turns out.
yeah, I think the key there is just making sure that you're like tracking the metrics correctly. So just kind of
Right.
test it. Like that's always the hardest part, I think, of A/B testing is making sure you're getting your measurements right. Um, I was listening to the Entre Programmers podcast the other day, and they were talking about running an A/B test, and like they were comparing their Stripe numbers to their um, A/B test numbers, and like Stripe was vastly different, saying that they brought in vastly different income than what they were seeing conversion-wise in the A/B tests. So that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
No, I've definitely found them very important to my testing stuff because they make assumptions and they show me that things are very different from those assumptions sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I would agree. Like they were. This is a really interesting episode because they were talking about like pricing difference. They were selling a training course at 99 or 149, and
Yeah.
like they were trying to see what the income difference was. So
All right. Who's got the next question?
So I got a more, general opinion kind of question,
hmm
and I mean everybody's following the development of Mantra, of course,
hmm
and Space Kitty, Redwood. I don't know what else. You got more than these. Um, Personally, I haven't used any of them, but I always read about them. They pop up everywhere, basically. And I was wondering, have you had a look into these different frameworks? What's your opinion on that? Like starting fresh with the framework or starting fresh with your own stack, basically?
Yeah, I've been watching Mantra kind of closely, and I wouldn't say like there's a few pieces that are different, right? Like he suggests using React Composer, which he wrote. I don't know. We talked about it a little bit in the podcast. Like to me, I think it's interesting that he's doing it, and I also think that there's value, at least in Mantra, because he's building applications and extracting out that knowledge of building that application into something like Mantra, and that's super interesting to me. Whereas the team at Meteor, like they're building a framework and they're not really using that framework. Like now that they're running Galaxy, they're starting to support applications that are being built, but they're not. They're still not really building applications themselves. You know, they're just building a framework. And so I think sometimes that can feel like maybe not the greatest path. You know, I guess. So I I think if nothing else, it'll make the Meteor ecosystem better because we're starting to have debates over why do it this way or can we do it that way. There's a thread on GitHub right now where they're talking about what is since mixins are going away in React, what does using React look like in a 1.3 world or after 1.3? And they're going to do the mixin and probably come up with some kind of like container composer API, and there's discussion around like should they just use React Composer, and they actually ran some experiments and just yesterday or this morning decided like yeah, they're not going to do that. They're going to probably write their own thing that'll be closer to what they already had. So but I think that like things like Mantra encourage that discussion to happen.
You
And so
personally gonna use that?
huh?
You gonna use that?
Mantra?
Yeah, in your
Yeah.
apps?
Well, I mean, I'm pretty daggone close right now in the app I'm building. I mean, it's Meteor, but I'm like pulling in quite a few. Like I've got React Composer and Flow Router and what's the other one? He's got the React Mounter, so I'm using quite a bit of that. But the other part of it is really just like some packages and then like some guidelines to follow. So it's not like a full stack. It's weird.
I have been reading the forums on this mantra,
Mhm.
and I'm just my thinking is I just want to wait for a few months, next couple of months before everything settles down, then kind of dig deep, because a lot of these things it does take some time. So those are my thoughts. I mean, I've been following those forum threads, and it's pretty interesting that he's doing all this stuff.
Yeah, I would probably disagree with that a little bit. I would say like if you want to learn, to me the best way to learn is to just start doing.
Okay.
And I mean, the thing is, if you wait to get started on something because things feel uncertain, like I don't think they're gonna feel any more certain 6 months from now. Like we're gonna be talking about something else, right? Like at some point we're gonna start playing with reactive GraphQL, and that's gonna feel uncertain, and things won't be settled out. But the best way to learn is just by doing, in my opinion.
Right. Okay.
And I maybe this is gonna bite me in the butt, but like I've got a class that I'm giving in 2 weeks or I guess almost a week now, on 1.3 with modules and React and all that kind of stuff. And like I've probably got to make a choice to teach the class React Composer because whatever is gonna come in 1.3 or 1.4 isn't gonna be out yet from Meteor. So I'll have to go back and redo that class later, or at least that section of the class later. So.
Okay.
All right, I know Nils doesn't have audio, but here we go. I was gonna say he should add a question. So he just asked, I've built an app where users can create products, images plus data. When I develop locally, I have access to Mongo via M7 Mongo. Great, super easy. But what once the app is published and a user just creates a random product with an inappropriate image, how do you take care of this once your app is deployed? Yeah, this is an annoying problem, right? Like we started getting spam on Crater, and I think that's maybe part of the question. Like, how do you deal with that? And then with Crater, we have an admin interface, and I think maybe that's the easy answer. You could throw together like YogiBen admin and just point it, like an app using YogiBen admin, and just point it at the same database and probably get an easy admin interface going, if that makes sense. I did a similar thing. I've got a blog post on it. That's probably the fastest way to maybe resolve that issue and get insight into your database. The other is if you're using something like Compose, you do get access to like a graphical command line where you can query data and stuff.
There's also these like RoboMongo
Yeah.
or Mongo Chef.
Yeah, I use RoboMongo myself, and you can connect it to a publicly open Mongo database with your same connection string that your app's using, and that would allow you to kind of dive into that data. But I think in the case of like inappropriate images, that's going to be maybe an annoying way to look at that. So I would maybe look at more of the admin interface kind of direction.
True.
The other thing, if you find that you're dealing with inappropriate images too, it's less of a maybe an obvious thing. Like you don't always have to code your way around it. One thing that I did to stop spam on Crater, which it seems maybe they're finding a way around it now, but it's we track karma, and so when you leave a comment and you get upvoted, you get positive karma for that upvote, and you have to get enough karma to be able to post. So one thought is like make them go through some kind of tutorial, give them points, and then only let them post things once they get those points. Like I find spammers don't want to jump through too many hoops to do something like that. I don't know if you're dealing with spammers or just idiots.
It was quite annoying on Crater. I've seen that. I mean, you have that automatic Twitter bot, right? And all of a sudden, I had all these Twitter messages for watch this movie or watch that movie or something like that. That was really annoying.
Yes, it was super annoying. Try being the one catching it all.
Mm-hmm.
Like every day I was getting up and deleting everything and trying to clear it out. But I think Google and Twitter both penalized me for that happening. So like my Google and Twitter traffic dropped dramatically.
Damn.
Yeah, spammers.
So I got another one. When following the forums, you always you read about forks, like community forks of Meteor and stuff. Are you generally in favor of such a community fork? Would you contribute? I mean, I read pieces here and there that pull requests aren't finding their way in quickly enough into the core and stuff like that, and the community fork would surely make this much easier. What's your thoughts on that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat part of that?
Yeah, of course.
Got interrupted here.
Sorry. While reading the forums, I always come across posts where people suggest having Meteor forks, like community forks. And since you can't help but notice that pull requests aren't finding their way into Meteor core as quickly as they potentially could. So I was just wondering what your thoughts on a community fork would be.
Yeah.
Would you contribute?
Well, I mean, likely I would probably contribute. I don't know. I mean, like it's weird, right? Because number one, the package ecosystem allows you to kind of accomplish quite a bit. I think that for me, contributions are usually because I find a particular bug or something like so super useful that I want to jump through the hoops of getting a pull request in. But I don't know, it's tough. Like I say that things like they move too slow. At the same time, I feel like MDG is very deliberate in the things that they do put out, and I do think that it's of a higher quality, and there's a lot more thought put into the why of building this stuff. And so, even though they're not building apps, I do think that they do build super clean APIs, in my opinion. And for me, I would rather. I mean, you could do a fork, right? And I think that's totally acceptable. And Meteor itself even has a way to accomplish this. And so you can create your own release track and put it out there, and you can tell Meteor to use that release track essentially. And it doesn't have to be blessed by anyone. So if you look at like Velocity and how it was working for probably 7 or 8 months, they actually had a fork of Meteor that they were maintaining that had like instrumentation. And so basically, you'd fire up Meteor, your Meteor app, and then it would fire up a second Meteor app. But that second Meteor app would actually use the Velocity fork. And they had Velocity stuff in there that was specific to like being able to run the tests and whatnot. And I think that was totally fine. But the reason Velocity went away is because it became hard to maintain, right? Like that came out with 1.1, and then they were maintaining it, and then 1.2 came out, broke a bunch of stuff. They had to like go rework all their patches, and it would like they had a pull request out that was never getting accepted, and so they just decided to abandon that whole process because they weren't really getting that accepted in. And it feels maybe disheartening to have to keep that long running pull request accurate and workable, especially when big pieces of the system might change. So for me, I think the better tactic and the tactic I've been trying to take is let's figure out how we get pull requests accepted in more easily. And so I had a pull request accepted last week that outlined like who's in charge of different areas of the application. And so now it becomes clear if you're working on something for Blaze or you're working on something for the data team, like you can get the right people involved in the conversation if you're going to have a pull request. And I think that's the hardest part. Like I didn't know, like I have a pull request that's still out there from May. It just adds something for Blaze. It has tests, it has documentation, it has like everything it needs to be good to go. And like for the longest time, I didn't even know who to talk to about getting it merged. Like it had plenty of +1s on it, but like who's in charge of accepting Blaze pull requests? That was never super obvious. But that's getting better, and it looks like they've tentatively agreed to creating a Meteor community GitHub repo, and going forward we're going to have some discussion around like how does the community contribute to Meteor in an effective way, and there's going to be a lot of discussion around that happening in that GitHub repo. So
okay,
that's exciting to me.
Good question. How many full-time core developers are there in MDG? Do we know?
No, because they don't update their website super often. If I had to guess, I'd say it's somewhere around 10 to 12. Yeah, on Meteor itself. I also think they have additional developers that are on Galaxy. So
Yeah.
you have guys like Zoltan who's working full-time on Galaxy.
So about this forking Meteor, basically, if you can't have 7 full-time developers working on that fork, it's not really feasible to have a fork, because at some point MDG's Meteor and the fork Meteor would be eligible, basically. So I don't think it's a maintainable strategy to have a fork.
I would tend to probably agree along those lines. Like you can see, if you go look in the forums, you can see Abigail talking about it, and they're building their own kind of fork of Meteor that's more, I guess, compliant with how the like HIPAA compliance stuff works here in the U.S. And so they want to. Their goal is to make it easier to build applications for the medical industry in the U.S. And you know, it sounds, you know, if you find some of her more recent posts, it sounds like it's actually kind of hard to maintain all that. And so I think that I'd really want to have a good reason to do it if I were going to do it, or you really have to feel like you're going to split off from Meteor if you're going to do it for real, I guess.
Yeah.
So I have this question. I was reading your email list, and recently you published about microservices. I think that was like last week or 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, what is your, did you use any testing framework? Because like, was there any testing framework for microservices? Because you're looking at the app level, right? You're breaking the app level. So how does,
well,
that's a different game, I think.
Yeah, so I think that you're going to have two different kind of levels of testing here. And when you look at a microservice and what you're doing, you're essentially creating an API. And so you're really talking about creating API tests and going that route. So, you know, you can use something like Chimp and Mocha, and you're basically like for the microservices that I've built, right? So that article I was talking about was really just, I don't know, it's borderline. Like, is it microservices? Like a lot of people said it wasn't because you're sharing a database, and that's like an anti-pattern. So, I mean, if you go that route, you really just test the apps separately, in my opinion, especially in that case. Like the admin app, I didn't even bother to test it. The main app is tested, but the admin app is just there for me to like put in content and stuff. And so it's just me using it. I didn't see a reason to test it. But when I think about the other microservices app that I built, I actually split it out so that dealing with other API services became much easier, right? And so like I've got one microservice that deals with scanning the network for Apple TVs, and I've got another application that that one scans for Apple TVs, and then it also handles doing like requests. So like it'll tell the Apple TV to stream something, right? And so that microservice just deals with the Apple TV piece. And the way that I would go about testing that is to test that the publications are working the way that I expected. I would test that the methods are working the way that I expected, and just leave it at that. And then if you want to go deeper, what you could do is in the main application, you could write a test that says, like, I click this button and this whole thing should happen. But I think that gets much harder to test because you're going to have all those apps running in order to test them. So at that point, you're either looking at mocking out that piece of the application to do the end-to-end testing, or you're going to have a more complex testing setup that says, you know, I've got all these apps running. I think that's got one main app with 4 side apps built as microservices. So testing that would be maybe a little more difficult than you want. But I think, you know, if you have clean demarcation points in your code, right? Like I know that I'm going to press this button and it's going to make a Meteor method call to this API service over there. As long as I know this API service over there is tested correctly and works, and you know I've tested that hitting the button is going to make the right call, then I think maybe you're okay. You don't have to go super deep with it, if that makes sense. I think I muted you there. You might want to unmute.
Yeah, thanks. So the other question I have was, when I was reading your article, I mean, it's kind of, so we talk about microservices, and I'm still trying to get my head around. And So when you're trying to think about an app and deciding whether you have to use microservices or not, like how many microservices is going to be enough, for example, or how many microservices you think are going, because beyond certain point, it's going to be pretty hard to maintain. I think I'm assuming beyond certain.
I mean, it's not super hard to maintain, right? It's like I look at it as like a code modularity thing. You know, I can specify that I don't need to care about scanning the network for Apple TVs in my main app, and that code lives in one small folder itself, and it's maybe got like 100 lines of code in it, and it's just accomplishing that one thing for me. It's keeping track of the Apple TVs on the network. It's keeping that in a Mongo database that's separate from my main application. I can make a call and get that data, and it'll show up in my main application on the client if I need it. And I can make Meteor method calls to kind of control that side of the application if I want. And so if I look at it, the application is split into, I've got the Apple TV scanner. I've got another one that will scan a folder for movies. I've got another one that scans a folder for TV shows. And it keeps those bits of information and metadata in those databases, right? And they're not in my main database.
Right.
And then I've got another one that will set up, you just give it a file, and it'll set up a stream, like a HTTP stream, so you can watch the movie or the TV show. And so these are, like I've ripped Blu-rays onto a hard drive, and then they're available to all my Apple TVs. And then lastly, I've got the main application, which kind of ties it all together. And it handles login, it handles pulling in the DDP, like subscription stuff, so I can see all the data. And it handles like just orchestrating all the calls between the different services. But the thing that I gained from that is the fact that like I can independently work on one microservice. So let's say like the HTTP streaming portion of the app is working great. I can leave that up and running, and I can actually leave it up and running on another box. I've got like the box under my desk that's running Linux, that's running that streamer, and it has all the files on the hard drive. Whereas like the Apple TV stuff didn't work on Linux, so it runs on a different machine, and it handles talking to the Apple TVs. And if I need to work on the movie cataloging portion of the microservice, like I can go work on that, and I don't have to worry about disrupting anyone that's streaming a movie in my house, because the Apple TV and the HTTP streaming portion live in a different service and are deployed elsewhere, and I can update those independently. So you kind of get this control of like parts of your site still function just fine, even though you may have a breakage, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really cool. I have another question, if I may jump in.
Yeah.
General topic is logging stuff.
Yes.
So is there services like Loggly or what else? Winston has a lot of transports, I think. Loggly is one of them, or Papertrail, or any of those. Do you use them?
Honestly, I haven't used them, but I have. We've had this conversation a couple times in the Space Dojo Slack chat room, and Loggly and Winston seem to be the two that come up the most. I've also heard Logstash mentioned, but I don't. That's not really. I don't think that's a hosted service. I think you can get hosting for a Logstash, but that's also another option. So. Yeah, I don't know. No, I haven't really had a need to use those. But I could certainly see like.
How do you do it then? You just put everything in the console, or trace errors? How?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think for now, like, this really is an interesting question, because we do the one production app that I'm still kind of involved with. We do have trouble because the logs like the logging situation isn't great there. And so I think that's the point we're at right now. Like we're starting to add more logging in, but the logging, like it's a complex app. So there's Drupal, and then there's a Node app that sits in between Drupal and Meteor, and then there's the Meteor app. And we could probably do a better job of like getting the logging going on the Meteor app better. But they've so the like I'm the Meteor side of the team, and the Drupal side of the team has been working on like getting better logs, and then they're trying to get alerting to go on with the with the logging now. And so like it'll send alerts to Slack to say like, hey, this problem just happened. I would say for now, like we've mostly relied on Kadira and Kadira error tracking to maybe help us track down issues, but that's still not super helpful because the files are minified, and so when you get the backtrace back, it's like not easy to figure out what happened necessarily, because like the location in the code is different for production than it is for development.
Yeah, true. I found this was really hard using Kadira so far. Also, some errors show up in like 2 or 3 times, like in different. Some say just okay, something happened, and a bit more detailed, and you don't know if it's the same one or if it's a different one. And yeah, it's really not easy to get a hang of the client side errors.
Yeah.
I think for the server side, it was fairly straightforward. But yeah.
I would suggest using Winston. It's super easy, and now 1.3 is for me, I just imported the npm package, and then their documentation is very clear, and you just plug in where you need logging, and it just goes to a little file, and then that helps my error debugging flow a lot.
Nice.
Makes it a lot smoother. So.
Yeah, I gotta say, like I'm really digging 1.3 with the npm module support that they have now. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Well, one thing that actually brings up is some of these services like SendGrid or Mixpanel, where I have to use an API key. Is there some way to make that global, or do I have to recall in my API key to those services every different script that I use?
So my suggestion for that would actually to be use Meteor settings, right? Because that's
Right.
the idea for Meteor settings is that you want to be able to set it from the command line or your runtime, and so Meteor settings, like doing that, setting it via the command line or at runtime, allows you to have a different key for every environment you're in, right? And so if you think like locally, I'm probably going to have a development key, or I don't want one, right? Like I don't want to send email. I don't want to like accidentally email a bunch of people, which I've done with Creator before. Or when you're in staging, you want to use a different API key, right? And so if you think about Stripe, like you can get the Stripe testing key, and therefore you can put in test credit cards in staging, whereas in production you want live. And so you just do like meteor.settings SendGrid key or something like that, and then you can anywhere you're making a call, you just call that in, and that way like that's separated out in your code, and you can easily change it later if you need to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I'm already using settings.
Okay.
I guess what's happening is, for example, when I use Mixpanel for analytics, I had to basically do like const Mixpanel equals new Mixpanel dot config API key, and it wouldn't. I was used to the globals and Meteor 1.2, and so it feels like I have to call that with the API key on every single script I use, and it just felt sort of messy compared to just set it once and Meteor startup on 1.2, and then it works all across the board.
Can't you still do that?
It wasn't working for me, so that's why I was recalling it in every script rather than. Did I lose everyone?
Nah, I'm still here.
I think we lost everybody.
We lost everybody. Nata, you still hearing us?
Yeah, I'm here. Oh,
I
Yeah.
sure.
think
So
Josh is
everybody's
gone.
here except Josh. We kind of lost Josh.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
Yeah. hmm
Okay, so just to say that I think that also in 1.3 you can use the global meteor namespace,
Right.
which should
So,
technically work because if I think about it, I mean it's supposed to be backwards compatible, right?
right. Well, that's what I ended up doing. I just ended up using OKGrow Analytics
Yeah.
and the Meteor package, and then that works fine and lazy. But I was just like future thinking, getting used to using the 1.3 modules, and
Yeah.
trying to do everything the same way. And I really like being able to strictly call things because then I know where it comes from. And later on, when I go back to debug something, because my app's a little bit larger now, it's like, hey, that's where that comes from.
Mm. Concerning logging, one of the habits that I currently was made aware of is I have a lot of console.log or when I log errors or info or whatever.
Uh-huh.
And at some point it kind of gets a bit messy that you just can't remember where in the code that particular error or info was thrown, right?
Right.
And so I started putting in like hash and then a 6-digit value. So a unique identifier for every log that I posted. And so you can very quickly search for that particular identifier in your code.
Right.
So,
that was quite helpful.
so you do it like for every console log for that you put the hash code for every console log statement.
Yeah, or log.info or warning or whatever I use.
Right.
Yeah, not necessarily strictly during development. When I develop stuff all the time, I put a lot of console.logs there to understand what's going on. But then if I remove maybe half of them, the other one stays in, and then I just throw errors in production, for example.
Right.
And then if you just look at your server logs, you kind of just see, okay, product ABC wasn't found there, and you're like, damn, that is really verbose statement. Like you can't really make out what part of your app just threw this particular
Oh, okay.
log, for example. And then if you have a unique identifier, you can go back and check.
Right. That's pretty cool, actually, and that's pretty cool because it's very, yeah, I understand because I used to have the same issue myself. It's so hard to, I mean, it's time consuming. We got to spend more time going through the code. Okay.
Yeah. So I would suggest also doing that with Winston, and then instead of just putting it up to console, you can have it write to a file. And so I get, 5 or 6 errors that run in a string, and so I output the error to the log file, but it also puts the file name that it was called from. So that makes it super easy to go, oh, it was from this line on that file, as opposed to console, which will sometimes give you this massive object of errors, and then you have to figure out where exactly is that script being.
Yeah, exactly. The problem is always to go back to the code and see which method or which file where the error occurred, basically.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I guess logging also the file name is helpful, but I don't know. Did you try that in production?
Yeah. Logging the file name's the same thing. I mean, it's
Same thing.
It's basically just a meta where you just go like winston.log, you output the error message, and then you just manually put in the file name for you can call the variable of what file name that is.
Oh yeah, right. But you have to put it in manually, right?
Yeah.
No,
I mean you can just do you can do the file name, or you can yeah, no, there's a variable you can call that is that file name, and then it just plugs it in, so you don't have to manually type in, product.js. It will plug that in for you.
Hmm. Okay, I think Nata is leaving, so see you next time.
See you next time. Yeah, my yoga is waiting for me. He's calling me. Yoga
All
friend
right.
is calling me. But it was nice talking to you guys.
All right.
You too,
Okay.
Nata. Happy yoga.
Thank you. Thank you.